follow your heart, but take your brain with you. Alfred Adler. You were the smart one, not the strongest, not the most popular, but the one who had potential, and everyone saw it. Your teachers praised you. Your parents bragged about you. You got used to hearing, "You're so gifted. You're going to do great things." But here's the question no one asked. What happens to a child when their entire worth is built on being seen as special? Alfred Adler, one of the great minds of modern psychology, believed that identity is a compensation, a story we construct to deal with feelings of inferiority. When a child feels unseen, unsafe, or unsure of their place in the world, they don't cry out for help. They build a mask. And being the smart one is one of the most deceptive masks of all, because it doesn't look like a defense. It looks like a gift. You were rewarded for being smart, but what you were really being rewarded for was ease. You got praise when things came naturally. You were valued not for your effort, but for your ability to succeed without struggle. And over time, that shaped something dangerous in your mind. The idea that struggle equals failure. That if you ever had to try hard, it meant you weren't really intelligent after all. So you learned to avoid struggle. You avoided anything where you might look slow, uncertain, or average. You became addicted to admiration, allergic to effort. And that's where the seed of the problem was planted. Because life, real life, doesn't reward potential. It rewards persistence. It rewards people who fall, adapt, and try again, not the ones who float through with a flawless track record. Adler called this the fictional final goal, the internal image of who you think you must be to be worthy of love and belonging. And then adulthood arrived, and suddenly the rules changed. In school, you didn't have to study much. Things just made sense. You didn't need to ask questions. You already had the answers. You didn't need to struggle, so you never learned how. But now you're sitting in a job you hate but can't seem to leave. You have a resume that says you're capable, and yet you feel paralyzed every time you're asked to lead. Deadlines scare you. Feedback feels personal. You delay important conversations. You procrastinate on projects. Not because you don't care, but because you're terrified of what might happen if you try and still fail. Or maybe it hits you in relationships. You're articulate, quick-witted, composed, and yet deeply disconnected. People think you're fine. You even look successful. But inside, there's this low-grade ache of inadequacy you can't quite name, a feeling that everyone else got some manual for how to be an adult, and you missed it. And worst of all, you carry the shame silently. Because how do you explain to others that being the smart kid made life harder later? That being praised for how easily you understood things left you totally unequipped to handle what happens when things get hard? That praise turned into pressure, that talent turned into tension, that the identity that once made you feel proud is now making you feel like a fraud. So you stall, you isolate, you avoid. But here's the truth. This isn't failure. This is what happens when someone builds their self-worth on a role they were never supposed to sustain forever. Being intelligent wasn't the problem. Basing your identity on never needing help was. The good news? That story isn't permanent, and in the next step, we'll talk about what happens when effort, discomfort, and failure stop being threats and start becoming tools for growth. You got used to things being easy, solving problems quickly, finishing tests before everyone else, understanding what others couldn't. And every time you succeeded without trying too hard, someone praised you. They called you a natural, a genius, gifted. But here's the trap. When you're rewarded for ease, effort starts to feel like failure. As a kid, no one ever told you that real growth requires struggle. They just told you how impressive you were. So when you started to face things that didn't come instantly, math problems that didn't click, a sport you weren't good at, a project that took actual effort, something shifted. You didn't see those moments as normal. You saw them as threats, evidence that maybe you weren't so smart after all. So you started protecting yourself. You avoided anything where the outcome wasn't guaranteed. You didn't raise your hand unless you were sure of the answer. You didn't try new hobbies unless you could master them quickly. You didn't push yourself because the moment you did, you felt exposed. And that fear stayed with you. Now, as an adult, you call yourself a perfectionist. You say you work better under pressure. You laugh it off when you procrastinate or miss deadlines. But deep down, you know it's not about being lazy. It's about being scared. Scared that if you try your best and still fall short, there'll be nothing left to hide behind. You've spent your whole life trying to protect a version of yourself that was never meant to last. The version of you that always knew the answer, that never needed help, that never failed, and that version can't survive adulthood. Because in the real world, no one's grading you on how little you studied. No one cares if you got straight A's 10 years ago. What matters now is whether you can sit with uncertainty, show up when it's uncomfortable, and keep going when things don't make sense right away. But every time something feels difficult, that old voice creeps back in. This shouldn't be this hard. If I were really smart, I'd already get this. Maybe I'm not who I thought I was. And that voice doesn't just kill motivation, it destroys identity. Because when you build your self-worth on being effortlessly capable, you never learn how to be resilient. You don't develop grit. You don't trust the process. You just avoid the risk of feeling inadequate. So instead of learning to improve, you learn to escape. You overthink. You delay. You distract yourself. You chase the high of tasks you already know how to do, things that feel productive but don't actually move you forward. And the cost? You stop evolving. You start watching life instead of participating in it. You feel stuck, not because you don't have potential, but because you've become a prisoner of your own expectations. You were trained to believe that struggle meant something was wrong with you. But Adler would say, struggle means you're human. And effort is not evidence of failure. It's the first step of real growth. The truth is, anything worth doing will make you feel awkward at first. You will feel lost. You will doubt yourself. And yes, people might see you stumble, but that's not proof you're not smart. It's proof that you're showing up. And showing up is how you build the life you were never taught to pursue. Not one based on applause, but on movement. Not one built on perfection, but on progress. In the next part, we'll talk about what happens when you start avoiding not just challenges, but people. Because when effort becomes threatening, connection often becomes collateral damage. At first, it was just about protecting your image. You didn't raise your hand unless you were sure. You avoided things that felt unfamiliar or difficult. You stayed where you felt confident, where you looked good. But then something else started to happen. You didn't just avoid challenges, you started avoiding people. Not all at once. It was subtle. You stopped joining group projects. You skipped social events where you might not know what to say. You convinced yourself that small talk was a waste of time, that parties were for shallow people, that you were just better on your own. And for a while, that lie felt comforting, because it gave you control. You didn't have to risk saying the wrong thing. You didn't have to feel awkward or exposed. You could stay in your head, analyzing, observing, calculating. But connection doesn't happen in your head. It happens in the mess, in the moments you don't have a script, in the stumbles, the silences, the shared imperfections. And when you start avoiding that, you start losing something deeper. Not just friends, but a sense of being alive with other people. You see, real connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability feels too close to failure. To say, I don't know, to ask for help, to admit you're struggling. All of that goes against the identity you were taught to protect. So you perform instead. You become charming, sharp, funny, insightful. You read the room, you say the right thing. You impress. And it works. People like you. But you still feel alone. Because deep down, You know no one's actually seeing you. They're seeing the polished version, the mask. Alfred Adler believed that one of the greatest human needs is what he called Gemeinschaftsgefühl, the feeling of belonging, of being part of a shared life. But that sense of belonging can't be achieved by performance. It only comes when you allow yourself to be with others, not above them. And that's where the smart kid identity becomes deadly. Because when your self-worth is built on being impressive, you start to believe that love is conditional, that you must earn your place by being better, that if you're not exceptional, you're invisible. So instead of reaching out, you retreat. Instead of building relationships, you build walls. And ironically, the person who once stood out in every classroom ends up feeling like a ghost in their own life. You're not the only one. There are millions of people out there right now, sitting at jobs they hate, scrolling through social media, watching other people live, wondering why they feel so disconnected. And the answer is this: they were never taught how to be with people. They were taught how to be seen by people. But being seen is not the same as being known. Being admired is not the same as being loved. And here's the hardest part to admit. Sometimes you hide behind your intelligence not because you're proud, but because you're scared. Scared that if people got close enough, they'd see the mess, the confusion, the loneliness, the unprocessed pain. But that's the exact part of you that needs connection the most. You don't need to be smarter. You don't need to be more impressive. You need to be real. And being real will feel risky at first, because connection isn't earned by perfection. It's built through mutual humanity, through being present, through being flawed, through sitting across from someone and letting go of the performance. That's how you start to feel again. That's how you begin to belong, not by proving yourself, but by showing yourself. In the next part, we'll look at how this entire pattern gets worse when you try to use logic to fix what only vulnerability can heal, and why intellectualizing your pain is keeping you stuck. You're smart. That was always your strength. When things felt uncertain, you analyzed. When people were unpredictable, you observed. When emotions got overwhelming, you retreated into your mind, where things made sense. And that strategy worked for a while. But now, you feel stuck. You've read the books, you've watched the videos, you've journaled, reflected, made lists, created strategies, and still something feels off. There's this quiet ache that doesn't go away, this tension that logic can't solve. Because you're trying to fix something emotional with thinking. And thinking doesn't heal what only feeling can. When you were a child, your intelligence was your superpower. It made people smile. It made you stand out. It gave you control in a world that often felt chaotic, so it makes sense that you clung to it. Alfred Adler would say that this was your style of life, a personal blueprint built to manage discomfort and navigate the world. And for someone like you, that blueprint was mental. Be clever, stay ahead, understand everything. The problem is, emotional pain doesn't follow rational rules. It doesn't respond to arguments or logic. You can't debate your way out of feeling unworthy. You can't convince yourself out of loneliness with a spreadsheet. But that's what you keep trying to do. You feel sad, so you ask, why am I like this? You feel disconnected, so you research attachment styles. You feel anxious, so you build frameworks to manage it. But no matter how much knowledge you gather, the feeling lingers. And here's the part no one told you. Knowing isn't the same as healing. You can understand your patterns perfectly and still repeat them. You can name your fears and still be ruled by them. You can write out a brilliant explanation of why you feel disconnected and still feel completely alone. Because healing doesn't happen in your head. It happens in your body, in your heart, in the moments when you stop analyzing long enough to actually feel the thing you're trying to fix. But you've been trained to stay away from those moments. You were praised for being composed, rewarded for being calm, told you were mature for not being emotional. And over time, you learned that emotions were something to manage, not something to honor. So now, when pain shows up, your instinct is to contain it, to shrink it, to box it up and label it. But emotions aren't data points, they're messengers. They're not asking to be explained. They're asking to be felt, to be witnessed, to be allowed. The more you try to master your inner world like a math problem, the further you drift from what actually heals: presence. And this doesn't mean you have to abandon your intellect. Your mind is still a powerful tool, but it was never meant to carry your entire emotional life on its back. At some point, you have to come down from the mental tower. You have to stop narrating your experience and start being in it. You have to let the tears fall without dissecting them. Let the tension rise without fixing it. Let the fear exist without debating it. Because that's where the shift begins. That's where something softens. That's where the weight begins to lift, not because you found the right answer, but because you finally allowed yourself to stop searching for one. Adler believed that true healing begins when we stop striving to be superior and start allowing ourselves to be fully, vulnerably human. And being human means you'll feel things that don't make sense. You'll have emotions that contradict your logic. You'll have wounds that don't need an explanation, just space to breathe. So next time you feel low, don't rush to analyze it. Try sitting with it. Try breathing into it. Try letting it be. Because you don't need more insight. You need more permission. To feel, to struggle, to be unsure. Not forever, just long enough to realize that nothing about your pain makes you less worthy. In the next part, we'll explore how all this pain, left unresolved, turns into a defensive pride, one that isolates you even more by making you believe you're above everyone else. Eventually, the loneliness becomes too loud, the frustration too constant. You're tired of overthinking, tired of trying to fix what still hurts. You've read every book, listened to every podcast, and yet the ache remains, the same dull sense that you're living behind a glass wall. So your mind does what it's always done. It protects you. But this time, it doesn't try to solve the pain. It reframes it. It tells you, you're not lonely, you're just different. You're not disconnected, you're just more advanced. You don't relate to people because they're shallow, not because you're afraid. And for a moment, it works. Because it's easier to feel superior than it is to feel rejected. It's easier to believe you don't need people than to admit you don't know how to let them in. This is what Adler called compensatory superiority. A psychological defense built on top of unhealed inferiority. You couldn't tolerate the feeling of being left out. So you rewrote the story. I'm not excluded. I've transcended, but here's the thing. You didn't rise above anyone, you just shut the door before anyone could see that you were hurting. And maybe you've convinced yourself it's strength, that you're independent, that you don't need anyone, that your standards are just too high. But deep down, there's a part of you that knows this isn't strength, it's self-preservation. It's armor. Because the idea of being truly seen, in your confusion, in your insecurity, in your humanness, still terrifies you. So you keep the mask on. You hide behind intellect. You critique everything. You keep people at arm's length. And it works. In the worst way possible. You stay safe, but you stay alone. You become a performer in your own life, always polished, always in control, but never fully present, never fully known. And here's the painful irony: the people who care about you. They don't need you to be impressive, they need you to be real, but your pride won't let you, because for so long, being vulnerable has felt like failure. You were taught to associate asking for help with weakness. To show emotion was to lose control. To need someone was to admit defeat. So instead, you built your identity around the idea that you're self-sufficient. You convinced yourself that you're better alone. But no one is better alone. No one thrives in isolation. We're wired for connection, not performance. And every time you fake being okay, you drift further from what actually makes life meaningful. That's the danger of this kind of pride. It doesn't look like arrogance. It looks like detachment. Like you're fine. Like you've outgrown the need for closeness. But underneath, there's a scared, tired version of you that just wants to be held, without judgment, without pressure, without having to earn it. And until you face that part of yourself, nothing changes. You'll keep building barriers disguised as standards. You'll keep calling distance independence. You'll keep pushing people away, hoping they'll chase you, but terrified they might actually get close. So here's the truth. You don't need to be above it all. You need to be in it, in the mess, in the uncertainty, in the discomfort of being fully human. Adler believed that courage isn't about becoming superior. It's about embracing your place among others. Not in competition, but in community. Not in proving you're enough, but in discovering you always were. The real strength? It's in admitting you don't want to do this alone anymore. It's in choosing to show up, not as the smartest person in the room, but as the most honest. It's in replacing "I don't need anyone" with "I'm ready to let someone in." In the final part, we'll explore what it actually means to shed the old identity, and how you begin living not as the gifted child you once were, but as the grounded, growing adult you were always meant to become. You've spent your whole life trying to be exceptional, trying to live up to the praise, trying to justify the label, trying to prove that the smart kid they saw in you still exists, still has it all figured out. But now you're tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of performing. Tired of maintaining a version of yourself that's always composed, always capable, always in control. Because deep down, you know the truth. You don't want to be exceptional anymore. You want to be real. Alfred Adler said that we create fictions, stories about who we are and who we must become in order to be accepted. And the smart kid story? It worked. It gave you identity, attention, even protection. But it also became a prison, because when you define your worth by how brilliant you are, you stop growing, you stop connecting, you stop showing up when things get hard, and eventually you stop living fully, because everything starts to feel like a performance. So here's the hard question. What if you let that identity go? Not your intelligence, not your insight, but the pressure to be exceptional in every room, the obsession with always being the one who gets it, the fear of being ordinary. What if you allowed yourself to be something far more powerful than impressive? What if you allowed yourself to be human? Because being human means you don't need to have all the answers. It means you're allowed to ask for help. It means you're allowed to struggle. It means your value doesn't rise and fall based on how quickly you succeed, but on how honestly you show up. You are not here to win at life. You are here to live it. And life isn't a classroom. There are no perfect scores, no gold stars for keeping it all together. Only the quiet satisfaction of being present, of building something meaningful, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. That's the new identity, not the genius, not the prodigy, not the one who always shines, but the one who keeps showing up, even when they're unsure, even when they're scared, even when it's messy, because that person, that's the one who actually grows. That's the one who heals. That's the one who builds real connections, builds real resilience, and starts to feel alive again. And yes, you will still hear the old voice, the one that says, "You should be better than this. This shouldn't be so hard. You're smarter than this." But now you'll recognize it for what it is, a script from a past that no longer fits, a voice that kept you safe, but no longer serves your future. Because the truth is, you don't need to be the smartest person in the room to belong in it. You just need to be there, with your doubts, with your effort, with your willingness to be seen as you are. That's what breaks the cycle, not another achievement, not another clever insight, but the courage to drop the armor and step into the world, imperfect and open. And if this resonated with you, if something in this made you pause, made you breathe deeper, made you feel just a little less alone, then here's your next step. Don't just understand this. Live it. Start small. Do the thing you've been avoiding because you're afraid you won't be good at it. Tell someone how you really feel. Let go of the need to look impressive and say something honest instead. Fail publicly, laugh at it, learn from it, try again. That's how you build a new identity, one rooted not in being better, but in being here. And if you want more truths like this, not sugar-coated advice, not empty motivation, but honest, uncomfortable, necessary truths, subscribe. Because this is what we do here. We unlearn the performance. We dismantle the mask, and we rebuild the self, not to be perfect, but to be free.